One of the prominent institutions supporting the activities and projects of the Central Tibetan Administration in realizing and strengthening its democratic practices in exile is the National Endowment for Democracy. The National Endowment for Democracy has been associated with the Central Tibetan Administration for the last 37 years. Let us know more about National Endowment for Democracy from its CEO and President, Damon Wilson, who is here in Dharamshala for the first time. Damon Wilson is an American foreign policy expert with many years of experience working in various capacities of American foreign service. Welcome to Tibettv, Damon.
Jimmy, thank you so much for having me on the program. It's a real honor to be here in Dharamshala.
Honors all us. So Damon, could you tell our audience what is National Endowment for Democracy and what do you do?
The National Endowment for Democracy is a unique, beautiful institution. And it's set up as a private foundation, but it's a creature of Congress. It was helped give birth by the U.S. Congress with the idea of supporting democratic culture, values, practices, principles, and organizations around the world. And so we saw in our country about 40 years ago under President Reagan, Democrats and Republicans coming together, bringing in business and labor, often in our politics. These are forces that argue and debate each other, but coming together to say we need to stand together to support the democratic values that they value in their work around the world. And so the National Endowment for Democracy was set up as a 501c3, a non-governmental private foundation that is funded through an annual congressional appropriation, about $315 million a year, to support, for us to make grants to both our core, what we call our core institutes that represent the parties. You may know the National Democratic Institute, which is present here in Dharamshala, along with its counterpart, the International Republican Institute. And then we provide a lot of support for direct to civil society, independent media, and more than 100 countries around the world.
Right. Right. So, National Endowment for Democracy, right, you were talking about the projects that it supports the non-governmental groups in achieving and realizing these democratic goals. So, what is the relationship of National Endowment for Democracy with the Central Tibetan Administration and the Tibet's cause?
It's a really special relationship. I am just joined the institution about a year and a half ago, but I'm coming to the endowment that has over a 3-decade-long relationship, a partnership in support of the Tibetan democracy movement. It's deep, it's abiding, and it's one that we are absolutely committed to. And that's why I came to Dharamshala so early, to underscore that unwavering support for Tibet's democracy, for its people, and for the extraordinary experiment here in democracy that we see with the CTA in Dharamshala. And so with that, I'm here as a guest of the Sikyong to join the commemoration of the Tibetan National Uprising. But we also support many actors in the Tibetan community, projects that are carried out from civil society groups, from media groups, independent media groups, and in consultation to understand the priorities of the Tibetan democracy movement, of the CTA itself. So it's a special relationship and one we're really proud of and committed to nurturing and maintaining in the future.
Of course. So the NED shares a very special relationship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama as well, and it has honored His Holiness the Dalai Lama with the Democracy Service Medal.
That's right.
And you have had an audience with His Holiness this morning, and this happens to be your first audience with His Holiness. How did the meeting go?
I'm still a little bit giddy. I'm still wearing my prayer beads from that he blessed.
Oh yes, I see that.
It was really an experience of a lifetime. I have followed his work for years and have read much about him, have watched him speak, but to have the opportunity to be here on behalf of the endowment, to have an audience with him, it was really a moving moment, for me personally in my entire life. And to listen to him speak about incredible issues of peace and nonviolence. But also, he spoke today in our audience about the importance of the democratic experience. And it is a pretty remarkable story of how His Holiness really had the foresight, first in Tibet and then here in Dharamshala, to really ensure that Tibetan people, that their governance, that legitimacy would be based in the people of Tibet. And so it's one of the highlights of my lifetime to have had an audience today. It was very special to be here both for the commemoration and for this audience.
Right. And this is your first time in Dharamshala, first time witnessing, one of the largest Tibetan communities in exile. And this happens to be the place which is the seat of the Central Tibetan Administration as well. What is your general impression of the Tibetan community here?
Shimi, it's just extraordinary what the Tibetan exile community has built against all odds, against incredible challenges, to establish here in Dharamsala a true, effective democratic government. It's unprecedented around the world. We have the honor and privilege of working with many that strive for freedom and democracy, many who are exiled in their exile communities. And what we see here in Dharamsala is unprecedented, and it's a huge testament to His Holiness, but also to the nature and nurturing of this democratic culture in the Tibetan people. So to see the CTA in action, to meet with the Sikyong in his office, to see the cabinet, to see the ministries working, to be able to visit the parliament in exile, and to meet with parliamentarians elected from the diaspora representing regions in Tibet, the different elements of Buddhism, and to see all of this in action, along with a very vibrant civil society, an active media landscape. It's truly a privilege and an honor to see it up front, but it's also very inspiring because it gives the Tibetan people a voice, who have been deprived by a voice because of Beijing's practices, the CCP, the occupation, and the repression in Tibet. And yet here you see the CTA has created an environment in which Tibetan people have a voice that is heard globally. And it's not only heard globally, it can inspire freedom-loving people around the world, inspire their movements. And so it's really quite a remarkable accomplishment.
Yes. Talking about people in Tibet and being the voice of them. In exile, the Tibetan community has embraced democracy under the visionary leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, of course. And over the years, a lot of reforms have been introduced to further democratize this exile polity. And now the Central Tibetan Administration has become this fully functioning representative democracy. However, a larger debate informs a challenge in development and functioning of democratic procedures in a territoryless polity, that is, CTA functioning away from its territory.
Right.
So how do you think the Central Tibetan Administration can ensure or foster growth in the face of such challenges?
I think one of the things I've really been struck by is the CTA's focus on how to be relevant both to the needs of those inside Tibet, as well as to serving those in the diaspora community, the exile community. And a recognition that now we see fewer people coming across the border, and we see Tibetans in exile that have come to India, many of them moving around the world. And so we've seen creativity and a digitalization of services in providing representation and connection to communities that are scattered around the world, whether through formal offices, through tapping into the exile communities to be advocates for the Tibetan cause, all the while keeping an eye focused on what is important for the people who remain in Tibet oppressed, and to see, I think, the dexterity, the adaptation, recognizing that His Holiness and the CTA, this experience draws on ancient wisdom, extraordinary depth and experience and spirituality. His Holiness brought a real moral legitimacy, moral leadership to this cause. And yet to see how both His Holiness and the CTA have adapted to modernity and understand how to be relevant in a modern world, responsive to their constituents, and adapting to be able to provide also now a sense of political legitimacy. And I think I can only imagine that there are many leaders around the world that wish that they had the both moral and political legitimacy that the Tibetan leadership has established with its own people. That bond is special, and it has really prepared, I think, the Tibetan people for a free future.
That's wonderful. Thank you for your time. It's a privilege to be talking to you today. Thank you so much for your time,
Shimi, let me be clear, the privilege is all mine. At the endowment, all we can do is support the ideas, the struggles of others. And for us, it is a true privilege. It's a real honor to be able to be partners of the Tibetan people, the Tibetan democracy movement. This is my first visit. It will not be my last, so I look forward to seeing you again here in Dharamsala.
Good to know that, Damon. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.